When people think of Dracula, they usually think of a monster, a vampire, fangs, a castle, a creature that feeds on blood and disappears into the night. But when Dracula was published in 1897, Bram Stoker was not simply telling a horror story, he was writing during a moment of deep cultural instability, a time when people felt the world they understood was quietly collapsing. Early in the novel, Jonathan Harker describes his unease as he approaches Dracula's castle, writing, "I felt that there was some trap. I was sure that this strange adventure was all arranged beforehand." That line captures the heart of Dracula's symbolism. The fear is not just danger, it's inevitability. Victorian societies was built on certainty, clear moral rules, rigid social hierarchies, and firm boundaries between the civilized and the uncivilized. But by the late 19th century, those boundaries were eroding. Dracula emerges as the embodiment of that erosion. He is frightening because he moves freely between categories that should not mix. For example, life and death, desire and restraint, civilization and savagery, faith and doubt. Dracula is not just a character, he is the moment when certainty breaks. At first glance, Dracula appears to represent death, but symbolically he represents something more unsettling. He represents existence without an ending. Dracula is immoral, but his immortality is not freedom, it is a repetition. He exists in an endless cycle of hunger and concealment, trapped in time rather than transcending it. Dracula himself describes this burden when he tells Jonathan Harker in the book, "I have been so long master that I would be master still." This is not the voice of someone at peace, it is the voice of someone imprisoned by permanence. To Victorian readers, immortality was not aspirational. Death gave life urgency and meaning. Without death, time became meaningless. Dracula exists in a liminal state, neither alive nor dead, and that in between existence reflects a deeper fear that living forever might hollow life out rather than enrich it. He does not conquer time, he is trapped inside of time. The aspect of blood in Dracula is never just blood. When it comes to blood, it is identity, lineage, ownership, and power. In Victorian culture, blood symbolized family class, morality, and even nationality. To corrupt one's blood was to corrupt the self. This symbolized became explicit throughout the novel. Van Helsing warns, "The blood is the life." That line is not metaphorical, it is literal. When Dracula drinks blood, he is not feeding, he is taking the identity of the person. This becomes more disturbing in the case of Lucy in the book. As Lucy weakens, multiple men give blood to her to save her life. Arthur, Seward, Van Helsing, all unknowingly contribute, but on the surface, these are heroic acts to save her life. But symbolically, Lucy's body becomes a contested space. Back in Victorian time, the readers would have immediately felt discomfort. Blood was tied to ownership and purity. Lucy now carried the blood of multiple men, blurring boundaries of identity and control. This would have scared the readers back in Victorian time because of how they saw the aspect of blood and how your blood was tied to who you were as a person via lineage, heritage, and even royalty at that point. The novel never says this directly, but it doesn't need to. The unease is deliberate. Dracula's feeding stands in sharp contrast of this. The men who were giving out the blood were giving it out of love. Dracula takes blood through the means of domination. Lucy later describes his presence haunting her even in sleep. In the book, it says, "His eyes again pierced me, and then he opened his mouth, and the white teeth champed together." The horror is not death, the horror is the aspect of the violation. Vampirism represents transformation without consent, the ultimate loss of autonomy. This is why becoming a vampire is worse than dying. You don't just lose life, you lose yourself in the process. Dracula is inseparable from sexual symbolism. Victorian society was deeply repressive when it came to sexual aspects. Desire existed, but it was treated as dangerous, something that had to be controlled, hidden, or even denied altogether. Dracula represents desire without restraint. The act of the vampirism is intimate, slow, personal. The exposed neck becomes a site of vulnerability where the boundary between self and others dissolve. This symbolism is unmistakable when Harker encounters the three vampire women. In the book, it says there was a deliberate voluptuous, which was both thrilling and repulsive. That sentence says everything right there. Desire is present and it is terrifying. Lucy's transformation into a vampire makes this fear explicit. She becomes confident, predatory, and assertive, traits that in Victorian society found deeply threatening in women. When she is destroyed, Arthur drives the stake through her heart. The language is uncomfortably intimate, violent, and symbolic. This is not just killing a monster, it is reasserting control. Dracula embodies the fear that once desire is unleashed, social order cannot survive. Modern film adaptations amplify this symbolism. In Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1992, Dracula tells Mina, "I have crossed oceans of time to find you." Desire becomes timeless, obsessive, and unstoppable. Dracula is not just temptation, he is the fear of surrendering to it. Dracula was written during an era shaped by disease. Tuberculosis, syphilis were widespread and poorly understood. Illnesses were invisible, slow, and very terrifying. Victims of vampirism grew pale, weak, and very drained. The doctor described Lucy's decline with clinical detachment from the situation. He said, "She is losing blood, and that is enough." But the true horror of vampirism is not death, it is the spread. Dracula affects his victims, and once infected, they become predators themselves. Van Helsing warns the undead are born from the dead. Dracula is not just a killer, he is a contagion. This reflects the fear that corruption can enter silently, change the body, and move outward unseen and unstoppable. Dracula is not from England, he comes from Eastern Europe, a region Victorian England viewed as mystery, backwards, and dangerous. Dracula does not invade violently, he integrates. He studies English law, he buys property, he moves quietly. Dracula himself says, "I long to go through the crowded streets of your mighty London." That line right there is chilling. He doesn't want to destroy civilization, he wants to enter it. Dracula represents the fear of cultural infiltration, the anxiety that the greatest threat are not external attacks but internal corruption. This is why he must be hunted, purified, and expelled. He threatens bloodlines, identities, and control. Religion is the primary defense against Dracula. Crosses, holy water, sacred rituals, but symbolically this reflects fear, not faith. Dracula exists outside of divine authority. He is intelligent, strategic, and powerful. Van Helsing admits, "We go out as the old knights of the cross." The language is desperate, because what if God is not watching? Dracula represents the fear that morality is not guaranteed, that evil can exist without divine punishment. In 1922's Nosferatu, Count Orlok is described as a creature of plague, a godless evil. Dracula embodies a universe where darkness does not require permission. Dracula survives because he evolves. Each generation reshapes him to reflect its fears. Fear of death, the fear of desire, the fear of disease, the fear of invasion, and the fear of losing control. Dracula is not just a monster, he is a mirror, and what he reflects is whatever society is most afraid to face at that moment in time. This is why Dracula never truly dies.